Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Trinity Stamps. Today we are going to be making this fun little Halloween card. I'm using Web Designer, the stamps and dies, also the full moon stencil and dies, Simply Sentimental Halloween, both the stamps and dies, and then this one is the You Donut Scare Me die, and that's actually a companion die to their circle card base. So while we get into the ink blending here, I am doing this, obviously, this very large moon with the full moon stencil and die cut. So I am just creating my sky. This is maybe the shortest video I have ever created. I really honestly don't. I don't even know how it got, I think because there's very limited coloring, but there is some. But what I really wanted to talk to you guys about was how we can add textures and different things that we can add to our card to really help the design kind of pop and add lots of interest without really kind of breaking our budget. So here I do prefer to basically create my own colored cardstock, if you will, because I have invested the money into my distress inks. I do sometimes still use colored cardstock, but back when I first started and I was really on a fine, tight budget, I only bought white cardstock and then I put the investment into my inks. So that way I could create my own colors, whatever I needed them to be. Here I am doing a little bit of what I call a halo effect. So we're leaving the center lighter and the outside darker. This is obviously sped up quite a bit. I like to work from my lightest color out to my darkest and then my darkest back into my lightest. I feel like this gives me a really good blend where everything's nice and saturated. Plus, it's going to give us a little bit of a glow. This moon is pretty large, so it almost fills our A2 size card. But here is the first thing that we can add to our card for like a little wow factor for very little money. I chose to use just the Perfect Pearls in the color Perfect Pearls, and you just mix that with a little bit of water. The price point for those is about $5, but you have them for like they last forever. I mean, I think I've only owned two in the entirety of the time I've been crafting, and I've been making cards since 2010. You could also use acrylic paint to do the same thing, which would give you an additional texture because it would sit kind of bumped up. And like the apple barrel acrylic paint is like 58 cents at Walmart. So two really affordable things that you can use to add like those stars to get that wow factor. Now that we've done our die cutting for our moon, I'm going to use the stencil. You could use a finger dauber. You could even turn the Versamark or whatever sticky embossy ink you're using upside down to kind of pounce over this. I am using a paper pouncer. But the next thing that you can use for that, you know, bit of wow factor that will last a really long time is embossing powder. So there's a bunch of different embossing powders, and I tend to stick with like the classic white or something that is going to really be lots of fun. So this one that I'm using here today is a satin pearl. And so while that's going to give me a really shiny, smooth texture on this, the textured part of the stencil, it's also, I could do this in just white, or I could do this with other types. I could do this with glow in the dark. They would be so fun. In the summer, I like to use the puff one to create like a coastline. So it's a white one that will puff up. Also the sand, I have a sand one that mimics like the grittiness of sand on my beach cards. I also use the puff embossing powder for my winter cards to create snow. And an embossing powder can be anywhere between $5 to $8. Mostly they're in the 6 to 7 range. But again, they last forever. So here you can see, I love that pearlescent shine that we're getting on the moon. The next one is kind of middle of the road because it is a consumable. Well, they all are technically, but this one is vellum. So I think vellum kind of gets underutilized. because it is another texture that you can add. It's transparent. It offers us a lot of different techniques that we can do without really being too terribly expensive. I think the Hero Arts and the Altenew vellum, but there's a bunch of different ones on the market and you don't use them a ton. I stamped my spider in the Black Soot Distress ink, which is the same thing I ink blended with. And if you've ever watched my channel, you've heard me say that I don't love the way that Distress inks stamp. And that is still true. But I needed it to be really light so that I could add my shading on top of it. That is why I chose to stamp in that particular ink. So it's solid-ish, but like kind of gray, right? So I'm going to go in and I'm going to start adding some shading with my Copic markers. And this is going to help to give my stamp a little bit more dimension, even though we are coloring him or her black. So I'm going in with my black marker. I am creating a little bit of shadow at the joint, so that way the legs do look like they're a bit more bent. I also created shading behind his head at the beginning of his body. Then this is going to help his head sit forward. Even once we work our way out to the lightest colors, you'll still be able to clearly see when you look at your spider that his head is a separate entity, color-wise from his body, not like we decapitated him. Though I'm not going to pretend like I've never done that to a spider, not intentionally. Sometimes that's just the way it goes. If you watched my channel back in the 2018, 2019 time when I lived in Kelly's Critter Cottage, I killed a lot of spiders. I had to. It was me or them. They were everywhere. But so we're going to work from that darkest color out to our lightest color. And these are all super dark grays. So I'm working from that black to a C9, to a C7, to a C5. And that C5 is our highlight color. It's a mid-tone gray. And we're really not going to use very much of it. That's just going to be for the highlight portion on the head and the back of the body. So that way, like I said, you can very clearly see that they are separated from one another. There's another, I can't remember the name of it, and I apologize. There's another web that Trinity has that I believe is in a stamp versus a die. You could also use that one and like white heat emboss it or something, and that would look great. But this is the one that I had. I'll have to remember. I used the circle card to make like a donut and a pizza for Valentine's Day for my kids. I'll have to remember to try to link that at the end. So originally I was going to do his little heart, or her little heart purple, but I actually ended up changing it to red. So I'm going to use the die to go ahead and cut this out. And the reason that we're talking about these things is and this might not be true for you guys, but for me, I always wanted to buy the stamps. When I was like on a super tight budget, it wasn't necessary for me to have like all of the colored cardstock or, all of the greatest inks or that was not something that I was drawn to. I was drawn to being able to purchase the stamps because I am a colorist. And then, I would make one layer scene cards and things like that. So, one of the first things that besides my inks that I invested in was the embossing powders, and then the Perfect Pearls are also one of the very first things that I bought for my craft room. The other things that I purchased, which we will be using shortly down the line, I think this might even be one of the first. No, it's probably not. I was going to say it might be one of the first bottles that I bought. It's not, but it's definitely older. So here I stamped the Halloween and white heat embossed it and cut that out. And now we're going to start building the card. So for my little, because you can see, here's where I colored it red. I just ran right over top of it. Because you can see liquid adhesive or any kind of adhesive behind vellum, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a foam on top of my spider, and then I'm going to have my web in place, and then once I put my spider down, it's going to adhere to the moon behind it and kind of trap the web in between the two of them. So it's going to be securely on there, but you're not going to see any of the adhesive. And then from there, I can go ahead and add the adhesive to my moon. Another really fun thing that you could have done in place of this would be to put your spider on a little action wobbler. I think that would be so adorable. But again, the point of the video was trying to tell you guys like all the affordable things that you could do to add texture and to really make a wow. But if you have action wobblers already, that would be totally adorable. I also have this really thin piece of vellum that I cut off of the piece that was left over, and so that way I could have it kind of like the string was kind of coming down with the spider, so that way really, because my web just kind of looked like it was floating in outer space, so I needed to use something to ground it. For the sentiment, I glued both the Halloween and the Fangtastic down a flat. But then I popped up my bats as well. So you can see like that really cool pearlescent shine. Now, if you didn't want to buy the pearlescent embossing powder, you could do the same thing with perfect pearls. You know, you would do the Versamark and then pounce on the perfect pearls. You would just have to set it with water. So you could achieve a very similar look that way. So I'm adding some foam tape to my little bats. And those are from the full moon dies as well. And then here I put that one there, but I don't love it. Don't worry, I'm gonna move it. I'm not in love with it. You could see how hesitant I was to begin with. But these are all, you know, all my little critters are kind of popped up. And then the next thing that we're going to do is well, this is me fixing the bat. We're going to blend in our spider legs. Now, this isn't something that everybody is going to think is necessary, and that's totally fine. In fact, there's very little that's even needs to be colored in. But I really like when my scenes kind of blend seamlessly. So I started with a different blue. It was too bright. Then I went over to the B24. That was too light. And then I was like, you just need to go to the 99s family because that's the navy. And that, sure enough, that worked. So ended up using a B99 and a B97 to just blend in the legs to the sky. Only the parts that were hanging over, the parts that were on the moon, it was already white, so I didn't have to worry about those. But I do prefer to color in my white outline on my die cuts. Not everybody does. So if it's for you, here's how I did it. If it's not, that's okay. So the next thing that I feel like it really makes a difference is in your embellishments. So these are the glossy rhinestones, and I used those to make his eyes kind of pop up. And then these are I think they're white winter icicle. I'll link them below, but they are white, but they're iridescent. So adding in rhinestones can really help bring your card together. Like sometimes we have these areas where the eye isn't being led around the card. And so your rhinestones can fill in and help to lead the eye to different aspects when you're giving it. These are the two that were like the next necessary steps in my craft room back when I first started, and that is stickles and glossy accents. So a thing of stickles will cost you about $2.50. The small bottle of glossy accents is pretty much the same, $2.50 or $3. The big one's like $6. But these last forever. Like Sandlot, forever. They last forever. And they will give you two different textures, two different ways to add shine. They are still some of my go-to favorites for adding different textures or making the details pop on one of my cards. So that is all of them. I hope that gives you, especially if you're just starting out in card making, I hope that gives you some things to consider when you're spending your dollars. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.